check this image out. This is your gut after years of gluten exposure. Again, I just showed you a number of studies showing that gluten causes leaky gut, including a study that showed that gluten causes leaky gut even in people who are not gluten sensitive or celiac. So again, when you're first going gluten-free, this is you. You're trying to put that fire out. And that fire, depending on how long you've been doing it, if you've gone on and you've got a full-blown diagnosis of an autoimmune disease, think of this fire as your house burning down. So let's talk about the path to disease. Gluten and grain. So undiagnosed, in that first box, you can see typically little symptoms, gluten-induced damage combined with other poor choices, but no major development of disease at this point. But then we get progression to what are called subclinical problems. In other words, you develop leaky gut, you start developing reactions, inflammatory reactions to food and environmental allergens start to pick up. Your body just becomes more inflamed. You are increasing the inflammatory burden on your immune system. And so the longer that goes on, the more damage you do, the more pressure you put on your body to heal that damage. And what happens to people in this stage is they start to develop what we call a repair deficit. They are now breaking down faster than their body is capable of repairing and healing. And when you start to get into that stage, full-blown disease is next. So you can look at that last section. It says recognition of problem but not its origin. This is typically what happens when people visit their doctor. They're given a diagnosis. Here, Mrs. Jones, you have inflammatory arthritis. We don't know why, but here's this drug for the rest of your life, right? So you get a diagnosis, but not an origin of why, and you get prescribed a medication. So again, this is the stage of illness and disease diagnosis is setting in, and autoimmunity and inflammatory changes are setting in, and now you've had them formally diagnosed by your physician. This is what I like to call the grainflammation cycle, right? So you look at this diagram and you look at grain, and I'm picking on grain first, but we'll pick on some other things shortly. Grain gluten is one of the biggest culprits. And if you look at this diagram, you can see all those things coming into the funnel, right? These are all things that are found in grain. So the reason I'm picking on grain and not just specifically gluten is because these are all true things about grain. Grains come with pesticides. Many grains are genetically modified. Grains come with gluten. They also come with mold and mycotoxins. Grains come with excessive omega-6 fatty acids. They can come with heavy metals and substances called ATIs. These are proteins that cause gut inflammation even without gluten. And they can cause leaky gut. So again, that leaky gut, that permeability is what starts and kicks off the inflammation. Now follow that funnel to the right. You'll see inflammation is increased, as is the cortisol response. Cortisol is our hormone internally that helps us cope and adapt and deal with inflammation. So when we are inflamed, we generally will make more cortisol to try to put that fire out. When our cortisol reserves can no longer keep up with that level of inflammation, this is the point when the doctor generally will pull out the prescription pad and write you a prescription for prednisone or another corticosteroid because your adrenal glands aren't able to keep up with the damage. Now remember that cortisol, when you make too much of it over too long a period of time, causes muscle and bone loss. It's one of the side effects. It also can deplete calcium and magnesium and selenium and vitamin C and vitamin D. So we don't want high cortisol for long periods of time because of the atrophy that it can cause. Again, it causes bone loss and muscle loss. It increases blood sugar. It causes vitamin and mineral deficiencies. And all these things can contribute to increased weight gain. Why? Because when you lose muscle and you have high blood glucose, you retain more water, you retain more fluid. You also, your metabolic function starts to slow down. The less muscle mass you have, the slower your metabolic rate. So we start seeing people build fat. Cortisol will, when it's driving up glucose in your bloodstream, your body has more glucose than it can utilize for energy. It will start converting that glucose into fat. That extra weight is going to lead to joint compression and joint pain, right? Now we have physical excess weight on the joints, creating what doctors oftentimes refer to as the arthritis of aging, the osteoarthritis. So that's different than the other types of arthritis of inflammation, right? So we have inflammatory arthritides that are rheumatological in nature or autoimmune in nature, like rheumatoid arthritis and ankylosing spondylitis and psoriatic arthritis and reactive arthritis. But then there's also the arthritis of excessive weight, where you put too much wear and tear on your joints through excessive weight. And that also leads to inflammation, right? So this becomes a very vicious cycle for many folks. And if we look at the U.S., what do we have? We've got 60% of the country is overweight. And this is one of the big reasons why. 60% of the country is overweight, 60% of their calories are coming from wheat, and more than that actually from other grains as well, and we get stuck in this vicious grain inflammation cycle. Now I want to show you some research on some other things. So I said earlier that grain comes with a lot of things that can contribute to leaky gut. And here is something else, though, that can contribute to leaky gut. This is lead. So I mentioned earlier toxic metals. So lead exposure remains a global public health issue, as the recent Flint water crisis has renewed public concerns about lead toxicity. You can see down there, metagenomics sequencing and metabolomics profiling showed that numerous pathways, including vitamin E, bile acids, nitrogen metabolism, energy metabolism, oxidative stress, and the defense detox mechanisms were significantly disturbed by lead exposure. These perturbed molecules and pathways may have important implications for lead toxicity in the host. Taken together, these results demonstrated that lead exposure not only altered gut microbiome community structures and diversity, but also greatly affected metabolic function, leading to gut microbiome toxicity. So again, damage to the microbiome is one of the hallmarks that triggers or contributes to leaky gut. Now we have this next study on mercury. You see, mercury induces tight junction alterations. It's the title of the paper. And if you look here what I've got highlighted, for the first time the results of the current study demonstrated that mercury caused intestinal epithelial cell damage and macromolecule leak through thiol redox dysregulation and oxidative stress. In other words, mercury damages the gut cells, causing hyperpermeability. You can see here cadmium toxicity. Cadmium exposure induces a significant alteration of bacterial populations and their relative abundance in gut bacteroidetes to firmicutes, accompanied by increased lipopolysaccharide production, reflecting changed metabolic activity of intestinal microbiome. Let's make English out of that for you. Cadmium induces a change in the types of bacteria that thrive in your gut. Now, when that happens, certain types of bacteria produce a known toxin called LPS, lipopolysaccharide. It's a toxin. That toxin leaks across the gut barrier and is now being shown to cause non-alcoholic fatty liver damage. So they're referring to cadmium leading to the contribution of that process. Now, second, in intestinal wall, cadmium exposures induces inflammatory response and cell damage, including disruption of tight junctions, ultimately leading to increased gut permeability. So far we've got lead, we've got mercury, we've got cadmium. Now, where can you find lead, mercury, and cadmium? Well, you can find those in rice. That's a grain. You can find some of those in chocolates. We've had a lot of publication here recently about chocolate being contaminated with high amounts of lead, right? We can find these things in consumer products, especially those that are imported, not regulated by our own EPA here in the U.S. There are a number of products being imported that do contain toxic metals. So you've got to be careful around heavy metal. You can see here in this study on arsenic, over the past few decades, light has been shed on varying mechanisms which arsenic induces cancer. Such mechanisms include gut microbe perturbations, genotoxic effects, and epigenetic modification. Gut microbe perturbations have been shown to increase the level of pathogen-associated molecular patterns such as LPS, leading to uncontained inflammation. Again, same story. These metals contribute to a heightened level of LPS, which can contribute to inflammation and leaky gut. The increase in inflammation is the major factor in cirrhosis, as I mentioned earlier, liver disease, leading to hepatocellular carcinoma, liver cancer. Alterations in gut permeability and metabolites have also been observed as a fallout of arsenic-induced gut microbe modification. The gut's proximity and interaction through portal flow make the liver susceptible to gut perturbations and ensuing inflammatory responses. Now, again, that's a fourth metal. A lot of heavy metal here. Where else can we find heavy metals? In those, well, we can find heavy metals as adjuvants in a number of the supposed healthy disease-preventing jabs. So, you want to be careful. Ask your doctor about the ingredients. You want to read the ingredients not only on the foods that you're eating, but on the things that you're being exposed to. Now, here's some information about xenobiotic interactions with microflora. So, xenobiotics have been known to alter the gut microbiota or microbiome for some time. Studies that show the effects that several typical substances such as antibiotics, pesticides, air pollutants, polychlorinated biphenyls or PCBs, and heavy metals have on the gut microbiome structure. So again, this is a review article on how many different types of chemicals that we're exposed to in our day-to-day affect our microbiomes. I hope the trend that you're getting here with leaky gut is microbiome disruption is not a good thing, and anything we can do to prevent it is a good idea. Now, this study discusses alcohol as its relationship to gluten, which is very interesting. A possible explanation may be that anti-gluten antibodies, arise in patients with genetic susceptibility following a chronic immunological insult, alcohol, centered on the cerebellum. Alcohol has previously been associated with antibodies to transglutaminase and is known to evoke an immunogenic reaction. You can see down here in this other study, conclusions, alcohol-related cerebellar degeneration may, in genetically susceptible individuals, induce sensitization to gluten. This is one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of genetic testing for gluten risk predisposition, because it helps you understand, one, whether or not you should avoid gluten as a general rule to keep yourself healthy, but in this case, too, whether or not high levels of consumption of alcohol could contribute to gluten sensitivity. Now look at this next study. You can see heavy alcohol intake is also known to cause gut leakiness, contributing to increased endotoxemia and inflammatory tissue damage in the liver as well as in the brain. Now we have alcohol and circadian disruption, because one of the other triggers for leaky gut is poor sleep or circadian disruption. So you can see in this diagram to the right here, published in the journal Alcohol, you can see that alcohol creates a circadian disruption. I'm in the middle column, follow along down the red center. You get altered gene protein expression, increased intestinal cytochrome PT2E1 and ROS, reactive oxygen species, leading to intestinal dysbiosis, basically abnormal bacterial growth in the intestine. This causes intestinal hyperpermeability, aka leaky gut, leading to systemic inflammation and liver pathology. I can't remember the exact number. It recently came out in research, but it was an alarmingly high number of people in the U.S. today that actually have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or even alcoholic fatty liver disease, just fatty liver disease in general. I want to say it was somewhere close to 40%. Don't quote me on that, but it was quite alarming. And so again, we all know that alcohol damages the gut. We know that alcohol is not necessarily healthy for us to consume, period. But that being said, the other things we're talking about today, even beyond alcohol, create leaky gut, which leads to non-alcoholic fatty liver damage as well. Let's talk now about fructose. Fructose promotes leaky gut, endotoxemia, and liver fibrosis through ethanol-induced cytochrome P450, 2E1 mediated oxidative and nitrative stress. Just a big fancy way of saying that fructose damages the gut lining, leading to liver damage. Conclusion of the study, these results showed that fructose intake causes protein nitration of intestinal tight junctions. In other words, it damages those tight junctions, resulting in increased gut leakiness, endotoxemia. And endotoxemia is a fancy way of saying it allows for bacterial toxins to leak across the gut barrier into the liver, okay? And that leads to steatohepatitis, which again is fatty liver disease, another way to say that, as well as liver fibrosis, at least partly through CYP2E1 independent or dependent manner. So that's CYP, cytochrome P, is a special enzyme that helps us to detoxify. Now we have another study here on dietary fructose and intestinal barrier. You can see the present review outlines some of the potential mechanisms associated with the development of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and fructose intake, with a particular focus on the role of the intestinal barrier. Then we have the industrial chemical food additives. So as you can see here, this image published out of Nutrition Reviews, you can see industrial MTG. What is MTG? Microbial transglutaminase is what that stands for. That's otherwise known as meat glue, right? It's the stuff that holds all the fake meat particulate together. So if you go to a fast food restaurant and you order a chicken breast, it's not really a chicken breast, folks. It's chicken bits glued together with meat glue. Same thing with hot dogs. Same thing with processed luncheon meats. These things are not good for you. There's a reason why, and meat glue is one of the reasons why. What they're finding is meat glue increases the development of leaky gut. That's what this diagram is all about. As a matter of fact, some researchers believe that meat glue can be a contributing factor in celiac disease, also leading to villus atrophy.